Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Weather Minds.
Yeah.
It's weather or whatever. It's a time where we get to sit around with other meteorologists and we get to talk about all things weather.
And a little bit of whatever.
And it's a little bit of
I'll
whatever.
add some whatever.
I think we will too. I'm meteorologist Ben Derry. This is meteorologist Ren Claire. We're here for the next half hour and we get to talk about our favorite topic, which happens to be weather.
It is.
Now, one of the biggest topics that we've seen over the last couple of days has been wildfire smoke, especially this recording was on Tuesday afternoon. So if you're watching us from this weekend, just keep in mind the time frame here. But it was super smoky earlier in the day on Tuesday.
It was. And I mean, this morning, it was almost kind of a little bit of a shock because fire weather changes very quickly. It's really finicky. I know I've said it many times, but folks kind of are like, hey, can't we find out maybe a week ahead of time that it's going to be like this on a Tuesday morning instead of the day before or morning of?
You can't do it.
You can't.
Yeah. Especially because, well, it's finicky. We do have forecast models that show us where the smoke is forecast to be, but it's very challenging. First off, like, you can't predict when fires are going to send smoke into the air, right? You can't really forecast exactly what's happening in that regard. So you have all these different, different things that could go wrong in a smoke forecast. Say, for instance, on Tuesday, it was raining pretty good earlier this morning, and one would think that heavy rain falling would essentially clear out the smoke.
I've heard this too. People think that.
Apparently is not the case, because while over time you need like heavy rainfall, you mentioned earlier, you need a waterfall of rain to wash out the smoke in the sky.
I'll sound like Purple Boys here if I say, imagine a cube. Have you seen, no, that's too much of a deep dive into a space YouTube video. But yeah, no, that's what you're talking about, is different types of density of water within a certain volume. What would it require to actually
clean out the air
through the column?
So earlier today you had kind of a light to moderate rain that was falling that wasn't washing the smoke out. It was actually bringing elevated concentrations of wildfire smoke way up high in the atmosphere and bringing it down to the surface. So you can imagine, like, if you had smoke stay in front of you, if you went like this, that some of that smoke would just get pushed down to the surface. And that's what we saw today. We had crazy levels of wildfire smoke. I do want to show you the current air quality map, which of course is current by Tuesday afternoon standards. And there's a lot of red on this map. Red meaning unhealthy air for all. The orange is unhealthy for sensitive groups, so for people with asthma, any lung disease or heart disease, those communities are affected. But the red is unhealthy for all. And basically what it means is any prolonged activity outside, especially the strenuous variety, can have some health consequences.
And one thing I want to mention too, when you say that, hey, that brings the smoke to the ground, and actually then that's just an issue in another location for the most part. One thing I do want to mention is we've heard similar things about that concept with allergies too, that if it's raining, you get some of those particulates out of the atmosphere. I do think that, yes, we're omitting a little bit of a potential chemical reaction that could occur with either different types of pollution, whether it's smoke that is in water on, say, a blade of grass, or whether it's a particular allergen that's now in solution in water on a blade of grass. There could be some change to the structure of what that pollutant was given temp and water. But for the most part, there's also the concern that once we dry out, you have all of those particles on the surface.
And not on the ground, right?
Yeah, and if it gets dry enough again, that could easily be absorbed into the atmosphere through winds, or actually work its way into the soil. All sorts of things that, when it's an allergen, that's not as much of a concern for the chemistry or the health of our watersheds or anything like that. But when it's smoke,
it's
not
kind of
great.
A different thing. Now, we did show you the map of the current air quality that has us in the red. Earlier today, we actually had some levels around the Twin Cities that were in the, quote, very unhealthy territory. And this is that hour-by-hour trend. This is a station that was near downtown Minneapolis, and you can see where it peaked just earlier this morning. I think that was, 6 o'clock this morning, where we were in the very unhealthy and even downright hazardous territory. From a number standpoint, the air quality index peaked, I guess you would say, or bottomed out, peaked?
Yeah.
Well, it peaked out at, I think the number was 264. I think that was the number. That was what the MPCA, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency representative said. It bottomed out earlier this morning at 264, which is pretty wild. And apparently, according to him, he doesn't know exactly the records, but he thought the previous record for worst air quality in the Twin Cities was 260. So it went from, 260 back in 2021. That was apparently the worst.
Which we both remember that.
And then all of a sudden, now this potentially was the worst air quality seen. And you had mentioned it was one of the worst in the world, too.
Oh, Dan was saying, actually.
Who is producing this program
he said Kuwait. And we were like, we should check that. And so, yes, we're definitely looking at some of the worst air quality in the world. That's true. One of the things I want to mention is because some folks, everyone responds differently to pollutants and allergens as well. But I mean, for some folks, the smoke isn't that much of a bother. For others, even if they don't have heart or lung issues, are not elderly or particularly, a young child, it could cause headaches for you, nausea.
That's what I felt this morning was the headaches.
Yep, I get
just
those
being
too.
outside for even just a couple of minutes,
right.
And it's not only outside. You can kind of even smell a hint of it indoors as well.
Yes,
just it's kind of one of those things where you can definitely tell it's around if you are near a bonfire, right, and you can smell the smoke there.
Yep.
But this is something that you can't just step away from.
No, even in your car, when air quality is as poor as it was this morning, I don't run my AC or heat if it's cold, because even though the filtration system is going to filter out a good percentage of that, those particles are so small. That's actually part of the reason why it's such a hazard to life, or I guess respiration specifically, is because when you have larger particles, that can be filtered out by like the hair in your nose. Sorry to be, like it can happen. And same with or certain particles don't work their way through our skin. Other particles, if they're small enough, can go straight through the epidermis and enter your bloodstream. Or if they're breathed in, they embed into your lungs. And some of those chemicals will be flushed out by your body, but some of them can be just like how we talk about plastics and recycling and how some of the things we use don't break down. Well, some of those things that you can breathe that are pollutants can live in your tissue.
Yeah, and the good news is,
sorry to be gross, but that's the truth.
These elevated concentrations of wildfire smoke, this is fairly temporary. Certainly the worst air quality we've seen so far this season has been felt this Tuesday morning into the early afternoon hours. But this is fairly short-lived. By the time we get into Tuesday evening, and especially Tuesday night into Wednesday, we are going to be seeing a vast improvement in our air quality. So this is fairly short-lived. It's, however, still probably going to be a story as we head into the next several days, because essentially these are gigantic wildfires that are untamed.
And I mean, in Canada too, you think about the different provinces, and we were not provinces. Did I say providences? I don't know.
Sure, Providence, Rhode Island.
It's whatever. It's weather and whatever. Then you get a little bit of the whatever.
Yeah. Let's, if we can, Dan, if you can pull up that wildfire location map,
that'd be great.
We can continue this conversation.
I wanted to mention something about wildfires, though, in particular with smoke. What was it? Oh, mentioning too, oftentimes when we're forecasting, we can have wildfires with the same sort of frequency where you're seeing all those red dots. Those are indicating wildfires that are, I believe, pretty
untamed, unchecked. They're like no one's even trying to fix this fire because it's so remote. Most of those areas you see, those areas highlighted in red, they don't look too far north than the U.S., but if you've ever been to central Manitoba, central Saskatchewan, that is an extremely rural environment. There are just no roads. Nobody really lives up there. So a lot of these fires are just left to burn unchecked until they start to potentially impact communities.
And I mean, some of that burning does need to happen. Naturally, it's good for the forest system. But when it comes to seeing some of these fires, I will say that, when we're forecasting, there are times where we will be looking at a handful of active fires, just like what we showed you there. Just because there's smoke doesn't mean it's at the ground. So that also shifts things. It's not that we can't see the smoke with satellite imagery. We can. But a lot of the times, it doesn't mix to the ground level at the level that we're breathing.
It's all elevated aloft, so you can see it. I think that was the case what we saw this past weekend, where we had smoke around and it was very clearly visible, but it was way up high in the atmosphere. You're talking thousands of feet up, so really it just affects a couple of things. Sunrises and sunsets have a little bit more color to them, and it also kind of affects the temperature, right? Because it acts like this thin veil of clouds, so it was kind of almost overcast as we headed into the weekend. And so even
temps were a little bit cooler than the models were predicting, than we were predicting only by a couple degrees. I mean, you're not talking about a 10-degree swing.
It's just more noticeable. And I had a couple of people comment to this over the weekend. It's like, boy, it's not as hot as I thought it was going to be. Yeah, and that's kind of thanks to wildfire smoke, because these forecast models that do help us predict the weather, they don't always take that into account, which goes on us.
But then Sunday was still really hot.
It's still very warm.
And Saturday, we stayed almost 4 degrees shy of, it looked like pretty good agreement, mid-80s, no issue to revisit that or stress. I think we got to 81, and then Friday also temperatures were depressed from the smoke. But then you look at Sunday, and we still had some residual smoke Sunday. I mean, the air quality wasn't as bad as it has been today, but we got like right around 90.
And then yesterday we did get to 90.
So I mean,
on Monday.
There you go. That's the life of a meteorologist.
Yeah, of course, right? And there is kind of a more pleasant side. I wouldn't say positive side, but there's a less severe side of this wildfire smoke, and that's the fact that we are seeing more color in our sunrises and sunsets. And I want to show you one picture in particular that was taken. I believe this is was this Tuesday?
Sunday morning.
This is Sunday morning. Okay, so the smoke is still very much visible, and that's the sun in the sky. And there's a whole lot more orange in that sunrise and sunset.
It was pretty eerie too, because winds were calm, and we were we're looking at sunrise, and there really weren't clouds in the sky. I mean, of course, I'm sure there's some high level. Technically, you could make an argument that there were, but for what I was looking at, there were no clouds in the sky. It was clear. And when you look up, it looks blue, but just kind of that haze that we talk about. But when you look out,
closer to the horizon, you're saying?
Yes, when you look out closer to the horizon and you have a longer vantage point and you're seeing a longer, how would you describe it? Like a longer column through that pollution versus
you're seeing
up.
More of the smoke, a deeper column.
It looks like cloud cover almost. It almost looks, it starts to, if it's dense enough, it starts to shift from that haze, that little blur, to actually almost just like a dirty looking sky.
And it's you talk whenever you see a normal sunrise and sunset, there's no doubt going to be a little orange and red in there, but that color is exacerbated by just all the particulars that are in the atmosphere. So when you have elevated levels of smoke, you tend to see a lot more of those oranges and reds right at sunrise and sunset. And most of the time, like what we saw over the weekend, most of that smoke is elevated way up high in the sky. Other times, like what you saw on Tuesday, that smoke gets brought right down to the surface, and that's the issue that we have. That's
but at least it's not a large area of high pressure that's just camped over us. I mean, we do have that going for us. I will say this pattern, our overall weather pattern across the continental U.S. Has been a little bit slower to the east with the system that has brought us some of this rain. And do you want to talk a little bit about upstream, downstream, how that can kind of impact? It's kind of like a highway that gets
jam.
that can impact things.
Well,
for us.
we in the U.S. we're in the westerlies, so most of our weather moves from west to east. But sometimes you get these weather systems that break off from the main flow pattern, and you end up with these basically. Just think of a river, right, where you have these little eddies that kind of sit and spin, and that ends up blocking things up, and that can mean your weather is not going to change very fast for days and sometimes weeks at a time, where you have either a big omega block, or you have a Rex block, these different types of blocking patterns that just divert weather systems away from you, or they keep the weather systems over top of you for an extended period of time. So you get that extended stretch of cooler, cloudy, showery weather. So you kind of more so want that progressive weather pattern. We like to see change.
Especially with conditions we don't want, like the smoke. So I think sometimes when you do see kind of a traffic jam downstream, that even if it's just slowing things down for us by, say, a half of a day or a day and a half, well, when you're talking about air quality and smoke, and also over time, if you have a stagnant kind of stuck pattern, that's leading to, it's like having, I don't know, I'm not the best with analogies. I don't know, like leaving your hose on or something. I don't know. Like the longer that's going, the more volume or density you have of the material.
Sure.
So if you have the same weather direction and the fires aren't contained and the pattern that's farther eastward of us is just pokey, then you're just adding to that. Yeah.
Pokey is definitely a weather
That's a
term.
technical term.
I'm going to use it in my next weather test.
The whatever part. Again, I'm just going to bring us back to the whatever.
So if you're still watching this, that means that you're still interested in weather and that you're okay with us kind of branching out and getting a bit more in the weeds. Let's talk about something that you wanted to mention as well. This was something that was more from a climate perspective at how our overall weather has been changing over the continental U.S. over the last several decades. You want to take it from
there? Sure. So the 100th meridian is an approximate line of longitude that approximately historically, so when it comes to weather observations and weather books within the U.S., I mean, we don't go back too far. We're not talking hundreds of years, but you get the idea. This line of longitude is an approximate kind of delineation, if you will, from a drier west coast juxtaposed to a more humid east coast.
Right.
Now, when you're talking about dry, and there's all sorts of different climates here. Right away, you can kind of see that if you look to the east, the Gulf is going to be a big factor into why we have more moisture in this part of the plains east of that line. And to the west, the Rockies are going to define that sort of a climate. So west of the Rockies, California, and whatnot, kind of ignore that for now.
Sure. It's more maritime Pacific.
That's that's not what's marching towards us. But this 100th meridian climatologically is shifting eastward, and that's leading to a lot of what we see east of the Rockies. That sort of a forecast. That's overall becoming more prevalent through the Dakotas, through Nebraska at large, and now hugging western Minnesota. And when you have those drier climates that are a higher frequency of on average lower humidity and whatnot, in plain states, as well as the heat still, because we're still dealing with you're stressing out that soil, you're increasing fire weather, you're increasing drought. That's pretty much what I'm trying to say.
Well, let's show that U.S. drought monitor, the latest one. This is issued this past Thursday. I mean, you can certainly see the persistent drought that continues. I mean, over the desert Southwest, it's a little bit different, but you're talking areas immediately east of, say, the Colorado Rockies.
Yeah, and do you want to talk about how moisture, again, these are all approximate. So when we're talking climatology, we're talking 30-year intervals for now. A lot of those intervals don't necessarily tell the story the way climatologists or meteorologists want them to, given the pace of change that we've observed. That's a whole different conversation, but I do think that this still tells a decent story of if you kind of think of where the Rockies are and you look east of the peak of the,
the Continental Divide.
Thank you. Sure. You're going to see a lot of drier soil, of not as high humidity for air masses that are typically present. And so that's towards, typically oftentimes much of eastern Colorado. Right now that isn't the case, which is good. And then towards parts of Wyoming, the Dakotas, Nebraska, and then we've seen over and over the drought. Oftentimes it's kind of normal for us to have that to the west.
So it's kind of like, I mean, just imagine, going to, say, Pierce, South Dakota. Right. It's kind of the central part of the state. That climate is sort of shifting a little bit further east. So what the weather, several decades ago was more normal for Pierce, South Dakota is now more normal for, say, Sioux Falls.
Right.
And what was normal for Sioux Falls is now a little bit more normal for, say, Mankato. So these subtle shifts, you are starting to notice a tangible impact on soil levels and drought levels,
crops,
and kind of more
air quality.
And things like that. So it does bear mentioning, and it does bear research on.
It does too, because it just means that I know Ben was talking about the westerlies and dominant wind positions and upper level winds that escort some of that smoke into the Twin Cities and into the state at large. Well, I mean, if we have a higher rate of drought across, let's just call it if I'm being, you know, the western quarter or a western third of the state. Sorry, that's a little bit of a mouthful. But if you can kind of imagine that becomes pretty common for us to have persistent drought to the west, and you're looking at a closer proximity to fires generally across the West Coast and up to the Northwest in Canada. Well, yeah, that's just, we're constantly downstream of that.
Yeah.
So that just puts us at a much more likely chance of having a lot of summer days that are impacted with smoke.
I mean, you've seen it over the last couple of years. It seems like smoke is just becoming more of a common thing here in the upper Midwest.
I should mention latitude is shifting north. So a lot of private sector companies, friends of ours that work in, whether it's agriculture, whether it's planning for different types of bioengineering for, I have a friend who works with different seeds to try to make them more durable in an extreme weather conditions, because these extremes are more common. And he was talking to me about how, it's just kind of an industry standard now that they've already made those adjustments with their calculations, with their financial choices. So we kind of need, as a public too, regardless of what sector we're in, have a degree of exposure to the implications of that. And I think we don't always necessarily have it in the communication realm.
And it's sort of this thing where, you know, A plus B doesn't always equal C. You know, A plus B can sometimes equal, you know, balloon. You know, so it's not this straightforward thing where this is what we expect to see happen.
No, not
this
at
is
all.
something that is going to be, it's going to be something that changes.
Trends.
It's going to be dynamic, and it will be trends that will
And
continue
anomalies
to
too, and that's just science. And I know people that aren't as into it, they want, you know, they just want an A plus B equals C sort of situation. And no matter, like you said, no matter what the year, no matter what the trend, that's just not how weather and climate will be.
Well, hey, Dan, you can tell us how much time we have left here. But if we have time, I do want to say a happy, happy new season.
Yes, start of summer.
Start of summer.
Yeah, exactly.
And everyone has this thing like, okay, official summer doesn't start until, June 21st, the summer solstice. No. False.
Wrong.
June 1st is the start of summer. And I'll tell you why. Because meteorologists, we're always right all the time.
That's true. Also, honestly, that's not true.
Tongue in cheek.
But I will say, I'll go into a more self-deprecating, or as my husband has once said, honestly, self-deprecating.
Oh.
Yeah, that was a good one, Adam.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I was like, that's not the right word. So anyways, like you've got Jamie, and I know you're into space. I like reading about space weather.
Sure.
I'm not going to be your teacher about space. Apart from the generic stuff, you know, the different orbits and what, but when it comes to the level that like Jamie gets really into it, that's like not what, I didn't take classes on that. Like if you're interested in it, you learn about it. And but that's partially why we don't follow that why we don't follow that sort of a season. We follow it from the understanding where the sun angle's at, and you know, Tropic of Capricorn versus Tropic of Cancer, and what, you know, but we're not really eligible to speak for that whole realm of science.
Right.
In my opinion, like we take maybe one class. I mean, that's a whole degree. That's like being a physicist and then being asked to be, okay, well, you're a physicist, so
you should know more
know
about
bio, right?
Yeah.
No,
not necessarily.
No, I get what the sun is. I know what the earth is.
Meteorologists, we use these 3-month chunks to really, it helps us keep track of data and statistics, right? So June, July, and August are the summer months. The, official, astronomical, if you will, that doesn't start until June. The thing is it changes year to year, right?
Right.
So that's why it's not always great to say when is the start of summer?
And it's like we're very detail-focused sorts of people.
Oh, yeah.
And it changes a lot. And also there's actually a specific time. And then there's also rounding. Even when you're talking about sunrise and sunset, like we're not giving you the technical is not just to the minute, it's to the second, and then there's rounding, and actually you can find a difference of even close to a minute depending on what site you're on. And we're not going to do a deep dive into that when it comes to the technicality of at 12:52.
Let's bring it up. That would take a while. That'd be the longest. That'd be a continuous weather forecast.
People would be begging
I'm sure
us
some of our managers
they'd beg
would
us
love
to
it.
stop.
I'm sure some of our managers would love us to give us down to the minute, down to the second
If it's
forecast.
0.5, you have to round up, even if you think.
That's right. Dan, could you bring up the temperature trend graphic?
Yeah.
Because it shows us the average high temperature through the official summer months, June all the way through September 1st. So average high for June 1st is 74 degrees. It peaks once we get into the middle part of July,
Yes.
July 15th. The average high, as warm as it gets all year, is 84 degrees. That's a seasonal lag.
Isn't that by, I thought that was rounded.
15? Should I round
Is it
down a little bit?
83.5?
It might be 83.5.
I think it is.
I think it might be.
You did it right. You round up.
We do
But see,
round
what
up.
if we talked about this every time?
That would take forever. But again, this year, astronomical summer doesn't start until June 20th. Who wants to wait that long? And by the way, the negative about that date, June 20th,
We're in
is because
Minnesota.
by the time we get to June 21st, guess what? We've lost daylight.
I know.
How about that?
I know.
So we're about, 18 days away from starting to lose daylight again. How does that make you feel?
Not great. And my birthday
Not
is
great.
in late July. It's actually, I think Belinda's birthday is the day after mine. But
Happy early birthday.
anyways, but I used to like get really sad. I would I think I've cried a couple times
Because
because
of-
I was like, school's gonna start soon.
Oh.
The days are getting shorter.
That's like,
That was my.
well, it's almost like you ever,
I'm not actually kidding.
it's like, have you ever, say, been on vacation and you're in it, right?
Yes.
You're enjoying
Yeah.
your vacation, but already you're looking ahead to when you're not
Yes.
going to be on vacation.
That's what it
and
is.
You're already missing.
Because
this time?
by our birthday, Belinda, by our birthday, summer is winding down.
It's winding down.
That's what I meant.
It's heading the other
Almost
way.
totally done. State fair's on its way. We're going to be living there, which is actually fun. But it's a to do. We plan a lot for it, you
Yeah.
know.
Oh, goodness.
And you got a couple weeks. Once you're in August, you got a couple weeks. There's the state fair, and they've been talking about expanding that too. So who knows? Maybe August will be just us at the state fair.
Real quick, you got about 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we should expand the state fair from 12 days to 2 weeks?
It depends if they
Depends.
are they going to build like a hotel for people that work there. You know what I mean?
That's true. You gotta
like
think of the
showers.
hundreds of people that work there.
That was.
I worked at the state fair 1 year. I worked 11 of the 12 days, and it's a marathon for sure. It's a marathon and a sprint.
It is.
That's it. That's all the time we have for
Sounds
today's
good.
weather or whatever. We'll call it Weather Minds, sure.
Definitely brought the whatever.
Hopefully the smoke clears out in time for you to see this, but until then, we'll take you back to whatever we have scheduled this programming. Hey, we'll see you next week for another exciting edition of Weather Minds,
Yeah.
weather or whatever.